Some places hold on to their history, absorbing the pain and toil of the past until the very walls breathe with memory. Shaft number 4. A long-abandoned coal mine near the fading town of Ubari is one of those places. It stands as a dark monument to an era of hardship, a place where the echoes of history have festered into something else entirely. I felt drawn to its silence, to the stories buried deep within the earth. I had no idea that some stories are buried for a reason. The entrance was sealed by a rusted gate, but a section had been forcibly cut open, a jagged invitation into the darkness. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, I slipped through the gap. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and profound. The air grew heavy and cool, carrying a scent of damp earth, decay, and the metallic tang of rust. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous circle through the oppressive blackness, revealing rough-hewn stone walls that seemed to absorb the light. A profound silence descended, so complete that the sound of my own footsteps was a jarring intrusion. The only other noise was the soft dripping of water somewhere in the distance, like a slow, patient clock counting down the seconds. I pushed deeper into the suffocating tunnel, venturing further from the world of the living. That's when the temperature plummeted. It wasn't just a chill, it was a penetrating cold that sank into my bones, so intense that I could see my own breath fogging in the flashlight's beam, even though the air outside had been mild. With the cold came the first sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It echoed from the impenetrable darkness ahead, a methodical sound that was anything but natural. It sounded like footsteps, impossibly light and careful, as if someone or something was pacing in the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears, and strained to listen. The tapping stopped. The silence that rushed back in felt heavier, more watchful than before. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, every nerve on edge. Then, another sound slithered out of the darkness. Faint whispers like the rustling of dry leaves, too quiet to form words, but distinct enough to be unmistakable. They weren't just sounds. They felt like a warning, a spectral message telling me to turn back. An icy wave of pure dread washed over me. This wasn't just an old mine, it was a tomb, and I was an unwelcome guest. My courage shattered. I spun around to flee, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall and gaunt, detached itself from the wall and moved with unnatural speed, disappearing into the deeper blackness. I whipped my flashlight towards the spot, its beam cutting wildly through the empty air. There was nothing there. But the darkness it had melted into seemed thicker, as if the very shadows in the mine were now alive and hostile. I scrambled back the way I came, my clumsy footsteps echoing in a frantic rhythm. When I finally burst back through the gate and into the open air, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. The cold from the mine clung to me, a physical presence that refused to leave. The familiar sounds of the evening, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves, seemed distant and muffled, as if I was still partly trapped in the suffocating silence of shaft number 4. That place was once the heart of Ubari, a bustling town built on coal from the early 1900s. Mining was a brutal, dangerous life, and countless men lost their lives in these dark tunnels. When the industry collapsed, the mines were sealed, and towns like Ubari were left to crumble. But the memories remain. The visit to shaft number 4 connected me to that history, but it also taught me a chilling lesson. Some memories don't fade. They linger in the cold, dark places of the earth, waiting for someone to trespass, waiting to remind the living that they are not alone. There are some places so steeped in darkness that they poison everything they touch. The Willows Apartments is one of those places. People don't seem to talk about it much, which is strange because anyone who has lived there knows the truth. That place isn't just haunted. It's a gateway to hell itself. My own experience there began when I was just a child, around 9 or 10 years old, and it left a scar that has never fully healed. From the moment my mom and I moved in, I felt it. A wrongness. It was like a constant low hum of dread that settled deep in my bones. Being a kid, I didn't have the words for it, but I knew. For as long as I can remember, I've been a magnet for the unseen. Spirits, entities, things that lurk in the shadows. It's a terrifying burden for a child to carry, and the Willows Apartments amplified it tenfold. The first sign that something was truly amiss was the change in my mom. Raising me alone was stressful enough, but here, her stress seemed to curdle into something else. Her temper became a hairpin trigger. The smallest things would set her off into a rage that was frightening and unfamiliar. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the pressure of our new life. But a cold knot of fear in my stomach told me it was the apartment itself, feeding on her frustration and amplifying it. Then, the nightly disturbances began. It started subtly. Faint footsteps echoing in the hallway when I knew my mom was in bed. I'd freeze under my covers, straining my ears, telling myself it was just the old building settling. But the sounds grew bolder. Sharp, angry knocks on my bedroom door in the dead of night. I would call out for my mom, only to be met with silence. The most terrifying were the kitchen cabinets. They would slam shut with such violence that it would jolt me from sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each time, I'd creep out of my room to check, my small hands trembling. And each time, I'd find my mom fast asleep, oblivious to the chaos that had just erupted. I was alone with it. The haunting reached its peak on the night my childhood friend came for a sleepover. That night would be the last we ever spent in that apartment. We were in my bedroom, sitting on the floor surrounded by toys, the sound of our laughter a fragile shield against the oppressive quiet of the building. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I looked up at the wall just in time to see it. A shadow, impossibly dark and fast, dart across the room. It wasn't the shape of a person, but something more primal, more ancient. A gasp escaped my lips. I pointed a trembling finger at the wall. "Did you see that?" I whispered to my friend. The look on her face was pure terror. She hadn't just seen a shadow. Her eyes were wide with a horror that told me she had seen the thing that cast it. A blood-curdling scream tore from my throat. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, my friend right behind me. We found my mom in the living room. "I saw it. I saw a shadow." I sobbed, tears streaming down my face. She took one look at my friend's petrified expression and the absolute terror in my eyes. And she finally felt it too. The undeniable presence of evil that had been tormenting her child. There was no question of staying another minute. She immediately called a close friend, and together they performed a frantic, desperate cleansing of our belongings. We packed only what we could carry and fled that night, leaving the rest behind without a second thought. We never looked back. A week later, my mom found out the history of the Willows Apartments. We learned the entire complex had been built over a desecrated Native American burial ground. The land was cursed, stained by a history of death and suffering. Our experience wasn't unique. The apartments continue to stand, preying on the living, a silent testament to the evil that festers just beneath the surface. The house was empty, a hollow space filled only with the familiar silence of a weekday evening. My parents had gone to visit my sister, leaving me to the quiet solitude I usually enjoyed. Seeking a break from the stillness, I stepped onto our balcony. The night air was cool, a welcome change from the stuffiness indoors. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the building across the street. That's when I saw it. Lying on the dark, patchy grass between the two buildings was a shape, stark white against the gloom. At first, I dismissed it as a blanket, probably dropped from a window by mistake. I almost turned to go back inside, but something made me look again, a flicker of movement my brain had registered, but not yet processed. I squinted, trying to make sense of the form. It wasn't a blanket. The white shape began to unfold, rising with an unnatural smoothness. It was a woman, draped in a long white dress that seemed to bleed into the shadows around her feet. She stood impossibly still, her head tilted up. A slow, chilling dread began to creep up my spine as I realized she was looking towards my building, towards me. Her face was a pale oval in the darkness, and stretched across it was a smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, predatory grin that promised pain. Her eyes, sharp and dark, scanned the windows of my building and the one she stood before, as if searching for an open invitation, for a victim. A wave of pure terror washed over me. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I thought it would break free. I dropped to the cold concrete of the balcony, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't let her see me. I felt like a small animal caught in the gaze of a hunter, every instinct screaming at me to hide. After a few agonizing moments, I scrambled back on trembling legs, fumbled with the sliding door, and threw myself inside, locking it securely behind me. The moment the door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The comforting silence was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive presence. It felt as if the very air had become thick and malevolent. Then, with a sudden pop, the television screen went black. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the entire apartment into absolute darkness. The power was out. My body trembled uncontrollably. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a simple power outage. But I knew it wasn't. The timing was too perfect. I stumbled through the dark, my hands outstretched, until I found my bedroom. Sleep, I thought, was my only escape. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my eyes wide open, staring into the inky blackness. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, a new sensation began to prickle at the back of my neck. I wasn't alone. The feeling was strongest from the direction of the kitchen. It was a palpable sense of being watched, an intense, hateful stare that bore into me from the darkness. It was an anger so profound, so visceral, I felt it could extinguish my life at any moment. My fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. Yet, a desperate need to confront the source of this feeling overrode my terror. If I was going to die, I wouldn't do it cowering in bed. With a shaky hand, I grabbed the small torch I kept on my nightstand. Its beam cut a weak, trembling path through the darkness as I crept out of my room. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step toward the kitchen. The beam of light danced over the countertops, the refrigerator, the sink. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. I returned to my room, the emptiness of the kitchen offering no comfort. The feeling of being watched didn't disappear. It was relentless, a constant, silent pressure from the shadows. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, observed by something filled with an ancient, inexplicable rage. I lay there for hours, rigid with fear, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart. I didn't dare close my eyes. Finally, as the first hints of gray light began to filter through the window, the oppressive feelings started to recede. Exhaustion finally claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep around 4 a.m. The sound of the front door opening jolted me awake. It was my parents, home at last. The morning light felt like a salvation. When I told my mother what had happened, from the woman in white to the suffocating presence in our kitchen, she simply shook her head. "It's best to ignore such things," she said, her voice dismissive. "Don't give them your energy. Focus on yourself." Years have passed since that night. I've never seen the woman in the white dress again, and the house has remained quiet. But her advice has never sat right with me. How can you ignore something that felt so real, so intent on causing you harm? The questions still haunt my quiet moments. Who was that woman with the terrible smile? And more importantly, what was in my kitchen that night, watching me with such pure, murderous anger? I saw nothing, but I felt everything. And it's the feeling of that unseen hatred that remains a cold spot in my soul to this very day. Some nights, you can feel it in the air. A certain stillness, a weight that presses down on the world, promising that the veil between what we know and what we fear is about to tear. This happened to me 15 years ago, a night that remains burned into my memory like a brand. Back then, we were living in a house in Panapetia. I was working for a media company, and the hours were brutal. My schedule was a chaotic mess of early mornings and late nights, often sending me home well after midnight. This particular night was no different. I pulled into the driveway around 12:30 a.m., the engine cutting through the profound silence of the sleeping neighborhood. My bedroom was unique. It was more like a converted office at the back of the house. The best part, for me at least, was its private door leading directly into the backyard. This little bit of access was my secret escape. I had recently picked up the habit of smoking, a vice I kept hidden from my family. That door was my gateway to a few quiet moments alone. I've always been sensitive to the unexplainable. Growing up, my grandparents would tell us stories, not fairy tales, but chilling accounts from their own lives, encounters with spirits and things that linger after death. After parking the car, I slipped into my room. The house was still and dark. Before showering off the long day, the craving for a cigarette hit me hard. A quick glance at the clock showed it was approaching 12:45 a.m. It was the perfect time for a quiet smoke without getting caught. I unlocked the back door, the click sounding unnaturally loud in the silence, and stepped out onto the small concrete step. The night was cool and dark. I lit the cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating my face before I sank back into the shadows. As I took the first couple of drags, my eyes adjusted to the gloom of the backyard. About 15 feet away stood a large, old mango tree, its branches like skeletal fingers against the dark sky. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement from behind the tree's thick trunk. Someone peeked out. My first thought was a thief. The area had its share of petty criminals who would hop fences to grab whatever they could, a piece of laundry, a tool, anything to sell for their next fix. My heart rate quickened, but it was more with alarm than outright terror. I stood up from the step, the cigarette still dangling from my fingers. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast quiet. Looking back, I know the sensible thing would have been to bolt inside and lock the door. But my curiosity, that inherited stubbornness, took over. I had to know who was trespassing on our property. I stared hard into the darkness, waiting for a response. Nothing. I took another pull from my cigarette, the glowing end a tiny beacon in the night. Then, it happened again. The same furtive peek from behind the tree. This time, it felt different. Slower, more deliberate. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, taking a step back towards the safety of my open door. My hand was on the doorknob, ready to retreat. But then, it emerged. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't anyone I could have imagined. A figure glided out from behind the mango tree. It was a man, or the shape of one, dressed entirely in pristine white. His hair was also white, a stark shock against the oppressive darkness. But his face, there was no face. It was a blur, a void where features should have been. He didn't walk, he floated, drifting towards me with an unnatural, silent grace. The world around me seemed to warp. The air grew thick and cold, and a paralyzing dread seized every muscle in my body. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing, but there was no rational explanation. This was wrong. This was impossible. The rest is a hazy, fractured nightmare. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got from the backyard to my sister's room. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. My sister was leaning over me, her face etched with panic. She said I had burst into her room and leapt onto her bed, incoherent and trembling. Later, much later, we learned the truth about that house. It was built on the grounds of an old graveyard. We lived there for nearly a decade, and that night was just one of many strange occurrences. But the image of that faceless man in white, floating silently toward me in the dead of night, is the one that truly haunts me.